During November, we spent 3 weeks in Japan. And for this trip, we returned to Tokyo, Osaka and Kyoto, as well as visiting Nikko, Hakone and Nagoya for the first time. So if you're planning a trip to Japan in 2025 or beyond, make sure you stick around to see what our experience was this trip. As it was my birthday just before we arrived in Japan, we decided to spend the first couple of days at Tokyo Disney Resort. We stayed at Toy Story Hotel and it was an enjoyable experience. You can check out our review of Toy Story Hotel after this video. I'll put the link in the description box below. Our first full day was spent at Disney Sea, exploring Fantasy Springs, the newest section of the park. It is really well designed and has 4 new attractions and 3 restaurants. We also explored areas that we hadn't fully explored the first time we came to Disney Sea in 2023. Day 2, we headed to Disneyland and gosh, this was overwhelming, but in a good way. There was heaps of people as it was the first day of the Christmas event, but it wasn't too hard to get onto rides. We got to sample some of the Christmas limited edition food. We also got to see the Haunted Mansion decked out in the Nightmare Before Christmas decorations for the Halloween and Christmas period. My favourite attractions were definitely Pooh's Honey Hunt and Beauty and the Beast. Day 3 and it was time to move to our next destination, which was Asakusa for the evening. We stayed at Express Dormy Inn and I'm going to give you a pro tip. If accommodation looks dated in the photos or when you get there, it does not necessarily mean it's going to be bad. And in most places we stayed, it was also a little bit cheaper than the more modern looking accommodation. Express Dormy Inn was 100% that as well. Slightly dated decor, but it was very comfortable and had an amazing view of Sumida River, including the Skytree and the Asahi building. There was also a foot bath and a public bath on the top floor, and we were super close to Asakusa Station, which was great because the next day we were heading to Nikko. Nikko was a really mixed bag. I'll talk about this a bit more in the Nikko video when that comes out in a couple of weeks. But as much as there is a focus on Kyoto having an over-tourism problem, I think Nikko is suffering more from the problem. It is a very beautiful place, but when you are squished onto a bus that gets stuck in traffic for 90 minutes because the infrastructure isn't there to support the amount of tourists that are visiting, either using public transport or their own cars, or rental cars, it massively detracts from the place. Admittedly, we did visit on a Sunday, but it is still something that needs to be considered if you're planning on visiting Nikko. Because of the delays with the buses, we only managed to go to Kigon Falls and Toshogu Shrine, but they are both spectacular and absolutely worth visiting. For our night in Nikko, we stayed at Hotel Natural Garden Nikko. Again, it's slightly dated, it's probably needed a little bit of TLC, but it was comfortable and really enjoyable. There was an open air onsen available for people staying at the hotel, and there was also a restaurant that specialised in French food. We didn't eat at the restaurant, we were pretty tired, so we grabbed convenient food before heading up. The reception area was really well set up as well, like there was a pool table and a library that had mostly Japanese books, but there was a few English books there as well. The staff was super friendly and helpful, and overall it was just a really good vibe, which was a great way to spend our night before we headed back to Tokyo. The next day we headed back to Tokyo. We saw this awesome old train on the way back, and we just sort of spent the day around Shinjuku getting used to the area because this is where we'll be staying for the next 2 days. That night we went to the government building, and holy crap, this is such an amazing experience for the low price of free. When we got there was digital art playing on the front of the building, and then we caught the elevator up and we went to the viewing platform. And the views up here were absolutely breathtaking. The viewing platform is a wide open space, so you don't feel like you are pushed up against the windows or you have to go around along the edges because there's too many people like I felt at Skytree when we went in 2023. I'm definitely planning on going back during the daytime next time we're in Tokyo. The next day we started nice and early and headed to Meiji Jingu. The park grounds and the shrine itself are probably the most peaceful I have ever felt in Tokyo, or anywhere else to be honest. We got here about 8:30 and there was a few people around, but as it got closer to 9 and past that time, there was definitely a lot more people. We then headed to Yoyogi Park and realised that the fountain that's like a centrepiece for the park is under renovation for the next 18 months. All in all, this was a great way to spend the morning, as since we'd arrived in Japan, it's sort of been go, go, go. That afternoon, we met up with a friend who was in Japan for work and had lunch with her before heading to Harajuku to have a look through the alternate fashion shops. I spent way too much money on an Iron Mouse collab jacket and it is so cool and I'm looking forward to being able to wear it in winter. Before heading to Shibuya, and I had to show lots of restraint in Tower Records because if I didn't I would be bankrupt and I would have brought home several kilos of vinyl. We headed back to the hotel and had an early night because the next day we were getting up super early to head to Hakone. For our trip to Hakone, we got seats in the back car of the romance car, and I highly recommend it. Just probably not at the start of the day because you will be blinded by the sun, especially if you're not wearing sunglasses. It is a really pleasant trip though, going through suburbia and then the urban areas of Tokyo before getting a little bit of rural areas before you get to Hakone. For our trip to Hakone, we did use the Hakone Free Pass and I highly recommend grabbing one. It is incredibly useful for your trip to Hakone. The first thing we did when we headed to Hakone was go on the Hakone sightseeing cruise, which is a pirate ship, which is so cool. We got the premium ticket so we could head up to the deck. From the boat, we did see the torii gate for Hakone Shrine, which was great because it meant we did not have to wait 2 hours for a photo. I must say, if you're thinking about either going to Nikko or Hakone, and you're planning on using public transport, I would definitely go with Hakone because things felt a lot more planned, a lot more user-friendly, and easier to use. We got off the sightseeing cruise at Dogendai and headed up the Hakone ropeway to Owakadani. Owakadani is a volcanic valley with active sulfur vents and hot springs. And you can watch these sulfur vents blow off their steam whilst eating probably one of the most amazing curries I have ever had. Depending on the volcanic activity of the area, you can go on little hikes and walks. Owakadani is where you can get the black onsen eggs, so they're boiled in volcanic water, which turns the shell black. We then headed to Gora Park, which is Japan's first French-style garden. The garden opened in 1914. One thing to note about Gora Park is that there is a lot of stairs, so it's not ideal for those who use wheelchairs, mobility aids, or baby prams. Our final activity for the day was the Open Air Museum. We got to the Open Air Museum about 3 p.m. It closes around 5, so I highly recommend probably getting there a lot earlier than that, as you will definitely need at least 2 hours to walk around. There is both indoor and outdoor exhibitions, and near the cafe is a footbath. I will be doing a video focusing just on the Open Air Museum soon, so make sure you subscribe if you want to see more. For our night in Hakone, we stayed at Hotel Zagakukan, and this was just amazing. The room was a mix of modern and traditional Japanese style. The futon beds were super comfy. There was a massive shower, and the cherry on top was the rooftop onsen just for our room. This was easily my favourite room of the whole trip, and it's pretty easy to see why. The next day, we briefly stopped in Odawara before we headed to Nagoya. We spent some time at Osaka and then went and found the penguin-themed cafe called PG Cafe, which was absolutely adorable. It was then time to check into our hotel for the next 3 nights, which was Choice's Hotel Nagoya Sakai. When we booked, the photos of the hotel were slightly dated, but we were okay with that because it was quite central to where we wanted to be. Turns out between us booking and us getting there, they had a massive renovation. The only issue I had with this room was that there was a massive step up into the bathroom, which I did kind of forget when I got up to go to the bathroom at 3 a.m. one night. But the hotel was very central, was very close to Oasis 21 and to the station. There was also a massive Don Quixote across the road from us. The next day we headed to Ghibli Park, which is out at Aichi Park. Getting tickets for Ghibli Park are a lot easier than getting them for Ghibli Museum in Mitaka, but it is still highly recommended that you book early. Whilst Ghibli Park is described as a theme park, it is not a traditional theme park in the sense that there's a lot of rides and attractions everywhere. The Grand Warehouse is a massive area that has a lot of photo opportunities in it, and like at Ghibli Museum, there is a theaterette to show shorts of what Studio Ghibli has produced in the past. I highly recommend getting tickets for the Grand Warehouse early in the day because it does get busy in there. We were the first group admitted into the Grand Warehouse and it was empty for a good 45 minutes. Next we headed to the Valley of Witches, and this was easily one of my favourite bits of the park. There is faithful recreations of buildings from movies such as Kiki's Delivery Service, Howl's Moving Castle, and Earwig and the Witch. They are all incredibly well detailed. You can't film in most of the buildings and they'll let you know which ones you can't film in. I actually think this is a great idea because you're then not spoiled for what's coming when you go into a certain building. We did spend most of the day here, but we didn't make it to all the areas of Ghibli Park. By this part of the trip, we were both a little bit unwell. Thankfully not COVID or anything that was too serious, but it still made us a little bit more lethargic than we normally would be. For our third day in Nagoya, we headed out to Legoland. Legoland is definitely aimed more at the small children and families demographic rather than older people that enjoy Lego, but it is definitely worth going to for Miniland alone. Miniland is full of recreations of famous landmarks in Japan, including Himeji Castle, Sensoji Temple, and Tokyo Tower, as well as ships and other cool things that just buzz around Miniland. Not too far from Legoland is the Maglev and Train Museum, and this was the highlight of my day. I'm not even a train nerd, but I absolutely loved this place. You'll learn about the history of trains in Japan, be able to walk through some of the older train and Shinkansen styles, see how the Shinkansen actually works, and what happens during an earthquake or a natural disaster to the Shinkansen. There is also train simulators for those who would be into that. There is a miniatures display and an exhibition about the maglev train that should be coming into service soon in Japan. We stayed at Namba Oriental Hotel. The hotel was under renovation when we stayed there, so some of the facilities were restricted or closed completely. The room was pretty spacious, but it was definitely old. Between us staying and me editing this video, they have appeared to have done the renovations of the rooms, but the hotel is very close to Dotonbori, which is useful for those who are coming to Osaka for the first time. The first night we spent exploring Dotonbori again. Considering it was a Sunday night, it was incredibly crowded. And it was pretty noticeable that there's been some massive changes in Dotonbori since we were last here in April 2023. I don't know if the area is gentrifying because of the Osaka Expo that's happening this year, or if it's just that the rents have become too high, so it's pushed the more mum and pop shops out of the area. But there was definitely more chains and more drugstores in the area than there was last time we visited. For our first full day in Osaka, we went to USJ. When we initially booked our trip to Osaka, we weren't going to go to USJ, but we thought that maybe the Donkey Kong area would be open by the time we got here. It wasn't. We were like a month too early. And later in the afternoon, we headed to Osaka Castle. We got here just before sunset and it was absolutely gorgeous. The next day we headed to Yameda, and first thing we did was go up the Sky Building. And some of you need to realise there's a difference between a tourist attraction and a tourist trap. Because some of you have been out here going, oh, Sky Building's a tourist trap, rah rah rah. No, it is a tourist attraction. A tourist attraction is where you go as a tourist or as a local that just wants a fun day out and enjoys themselves. Yes, you might be paying a bit of money, but you're going to either learn something or see something that you normally wouldn't see. A tourist trap is where you pay a lot of money and then you feel scammed because you didn't get what you were promised, or what was promised was overinflated. I found the Yameda Sky Building to be a really enjoyable experience. I did not go into the outside area because I am deathly afraid of heights. I did enjoy walking around the internal observation area and sitting in the cafe and watching the trains go by. Like, that was so cool. When we got to Osaka, I saw a poster for a exhibition that I did not know was happening in Osaka. This was Paul McCartney's Eyes of the Storm exhibition. I'm a massive Beatles fan, and I knew this exhibition had been happening in Tokyo, but finished before we got to Japan. So it was really cool to go and see it. That afternoon we headed to Shinjuku and spent some time exploring the area. The next day we headed to Kyoto, where we spent the day exploring a lot of shrines and temples. I'll elaborate more on where we went in the Kyoto video that will come out in the future. That evening we did head to Osaka Shrine before heading to Kodaiji Temple to see the illuminations. Next morning we got up super early, not completely unrelated to the fact that our hotel that we were staying in felt a little creepy and we knew that we would need to move, and headed to Kiyomizu-dera. I really enjoyed the walk from where we were staying to Kiyomizu-dera. We set off at about 6:30. Just be mindful there is still crowds of people at that time heading to Kiyomizu-dera or walking through Gion. There is also a lot of photography, especially wedding shoots, happening at this time of day. The autumn foliage had started to come through at Kiyomizu-dera, which was very nice to see. We then grabbed our stuff from our old hotel and headed to the new hotel and dropped our stuff there before heading to Kinkakuji. This day was a big day, by the way. I think I ended up walking 31,000 steps. We then headed to Ryoanji Temple. The mural painted on the walls inside the temple was just gorgeous. The rock garden was immaculate and the gardens around the temple are absolutely beautiful. It is well worth the time and the walk to get to Ryoanji if you're also going to Kinkakuji. We then walked down and caught the Randen to Arashiyama. We went on the romance train again, which was great. We got to see some of the foliage turning for autumn. We then spent some time around the Kimono Forest, which was gorgeous when it was fully lit up. And then we headed to Kyoto Station for a look around. This is probably a good time to bring up the fact that public transport in Kyoto is quite difficult to use at the moment, particularly the buses. This is partly because of the influx of tourists coming to Kyoto, but there is definitely some other factors coming into play with the situation. For the rest of our stay in Kyoto, we stayed at Hotel the Ems, Kyoto. This is a modern and fairly new hotel and is very close to Kyoto Station. The rooms are quite small, even by Japanese standards, and our room didn't have a bathtub. There was some space for sitting around in your room, but it was probably too small to spend a massive amount of time in there. The lobby area, however, had a lot of room for sitting and just relaxing. Of an evening, it wasn't uncommon for people to be downstairs with their suitcases, reorganising themselves before heading to their next destination. Our first stop for day 3 in Kyoto was Tokugawa Temple. The gardens of the temple are absolutely stunning, especially in autumn. The colour of the leaves, the sun coming in through them, it was just a beautiful experience. We spent the rest of the day at Uji, spending some time exploring the area and the shopping streets. Before heading to Byodan, the temple that's on the 10-yen coin. Before heading to our final destination of the Nintendo Museum. The Nintendo Museum is a must for any Nintendo fan or gamer. The museum explores Nintendo's history, demonstrates some of the prototypes for some of the previous consoles, and has a whole floor of gaming setups, including old school ones and ones using large controllers. If you want more information about the Nintendo Museum, I do have a video up already. The link will be in the description box and the pinned post for this video below. We started the day by visiting Nijo Castle. Nijo Castle was built in 1603 and was the Kyoto residence of Tokugawa, the first shogun of the Edo period. The castle is designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1994. The Ninnaru Palace has a special kind of flooring called nightingale floors, which are built deliberately to squeak as a security measure. It was the imperial family's residence until 1868, which was the start of the Meiji era or the Meiji Restoration, which was when imperial rule was restored and the capital was moved to Tokyo. Outside of the theme parks, this was the first place in which I'd seen security checks being done. There was also a lot of rules on what you can and can't bring into the imperial palace. You can self-guide yourself around the imperial palace, but there is also multilingual tours held on an hourly basis. The imperial palace is surrounded by a pretty massive garden area, so definitely check that out when you visit. After visiting at the imperial palace, we did go on a little bit of a dessert odyssey, as well as just having a general walk around Kyoto. For our last full day in Kyoto, we started at Toji Temple. The gardens are really well maintained at Toji Temple, and the 5-story pagoda is just wrapped with these beautiful, well-maintained gardens. The temples themselves are incredibly gorgeous, and we'll be back here later in the day for the illuminations. We next headed to Kyoto Aquarium, where their sort of main animal there is the giant salamander. Kyoto Aquarium is a very enjoyable experience to wander around, and a really enjoyable way to spend a couple of hours. We then headed back to Toji Temple for the illuminations. The next day, we started making our way back to Tokyo. We briefly stopped at Shinagawa to go to the Maxwell Aqua Park. It was an interesting experience, not one that I would recommend. There is infinitely better aquariums in Tokyo itself. We then headed to Meiji Jingu-gayen, and we got to see all the ginkgo trees lit up by the afternoon sun. If you are in Tokyo during autumn, I definitely recommend doing this. The trees are so pretty, and there is a Christmas festival not far away from the avenue, so you can check that out as well. For our last 2 nights in Japan, we stayed in Hamamachio at the Hen-Na Hotel. Now this is the robot hotel, and our room had a really good view of Tokyo Tower. Our room was also a really good size. For our final full day in Japan, we headed to Azabudai Hills and explored that area. If you're familiar with Sailor Moon, you'll know that Minato as a city features through Sailor Moon quite a lot. As a result, there is 5 manhole covers that are sprinkled across Minato, so we spent some time tracking them down. We then headed to the Pokemon X Koge exhibition. The combination of Pokemon with Japanese traditional art styles was a mind-blowing experience. The detail, the dedication, and the handcraftsmanship of the works that were on display was mind-blowing, to say the least. The exhibition has finished at Azabudai Hills already. There will be 3 opportunities to see the artworks in 2025 through Japan, and they are in Nagoya, Aomori, and Nagasaki. For our final night in Japan, we went to Rikyuan Gardens to look at the illuminations. The Rikyuan Gardens are considered to be Tokyo's most beautiful Japanese gardens and began being first curated around 1700. We also got some dango while we were walking around looking at the illuminations. Before flying out of Japan, we did head to Team Lab's Borderless. It is quite different to Team Lab Planets in Odaiba in the fact that it's very much self-guided and you can walk into the same room 4 or 5 times during your visit, where Planets is very linear and you must follow a path to get through the whole exhibition. I highly recommend getting either one of the first couple of sessions during the day, because that way you have the place to yourselves, or at least not as many people around you. And I also highly recommend not skipping out on the tea house. You do have to reserve the tea house when you book in your tickets for Borderless, but it was an experience that I will never forget. Before heading back to Haneda Airport, we stopped by Tokyo Tower. And then we caught the monorail out to Haneda Airport. This trip to Japan was wonderful in the fact that we kind of knew what to expect this time, but we also had a lot of new experiences, and it has definitely given us ideas for future trips, which I hope that this video has done for you as well. Please let me know in the comments below if you're planning to go to Japan, and if you're planning on visiting any of the areas we went to. As I've said during the video, we've got videos out already about this trip, so the Pokemon X Koge exhibition, and there is plenty more on the way, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching the whole way through, and I'll see you in the next video.